Today, I'm going to tell you the unbelievable story of Natalie Thompson, a young woman who went for a routine checkup and discovered she was carrying the Mafia boss's baby by mistake. Natalie Thompson sat in the clinic's waiting room scrolling absently through her phone, never imagining that this mundane afternoon would mark the end of her ordinary life. The sterile scent of antiseptic hung in the air as she adjusted the thin paper gown around her shoulders. It was just a routine checkup, a precautionary annual exam on a bright Tuesday in Manhattan, something she almost skipped due to a busy work schedule. At 26 years old, Natalie prided herself on being responsible with her health. She had no reason to suspect anything unusual. She swung her feet nervously from the examination table, the paper liner crinkling beneath her. "We'll just do a quick blood draw and perhaps a flu shot, okay, dear?" the nurse had said moments earlier, offering a reassuring smile. Natalie nodded and watched as the nurse prepared a syringe. She barely felt the prick in her arm. A flu shot was routine this time of year, and the nurse chatted about the weather to keep her relaxed. Natalie's thoughts drifted to the errands she'd run after this appointment, picking up groceries, maybe stopping by the bookstore. It was a day like any other, or so it seemed. When the nurse stepped out, murmuring something about retrieving additional samples, Natalie didn't think much of it. Perhaps standard lab work, she assumed. A different staff member returned, a harried-looking woman with a tray of vials and a syringe already loaded with clear liquid. "This won't take long," the woman said briskly, motioning for Natalie to lie back. Natalie's brow furrowed. "Additional samples? I'm sorry, what is that for?" Natalie asked, her voice tentative. The woman hardly met her eyes, busy checking a chart. "Just procedure," came the clipped reply. Before Natalie could object further, the woman gently but firmly secured her wrist and administered the injection into her arm. It was oddly quick and left Natalie blinking in confusion. The woman hurried out immediately after, leaving Natalie alone with a vague sense that something about this was off. But as the minutes ticked by in silence, she convinced herself she was overthinking. Maybe it was some new vitamin booster they're trialing, she mused. Clinics occasionally offered experimental treatments or freebies, right? She sighed and shook off the unease. By the time the doctor finally came in for the actual exam, Natalie had almost forgotten the odd injection. The rest of the appointment proceeded normally. Blood pressure, a quick chat about exercise, and the routine physical exam. The doctor didn't mention anything unusual. With a clean bill of health and an adhesive bandage on her arm where the blood was drawn, Natalie left the clinic relieved that her busy day could continue. She had no inkling that fate had already altered its course in those sterile white walls. 2 weeks later, life taught Natalie just how fragile normal could be. It started with an inexplicable wave of nausea on her morning commute. She chalked it up to motion sickness from the jostling subway train. But the next day brought another wave, the smell of her usual coffee turning her stomach. By the third morning, when simply brushing her teeth triggered gagging, a seed of worry planted itself in her mind. It couldn't be, could it? Natalie's hands shook as she counted backwards on the calendar. Her period. She was late. Very late. That afternoon, she slipped into a pharmacy with her heart pounding in her chest and bought a pregnancy test. "It's just to rule it out," she whispered to herself, cheeks flushing with embarrassment as if the cashier could read her thoughts. She hadn't been with anyone in... She paused, realizing it had been nearly a year since her last relationship ended. There was simply no chance she could be pregnant, not in the usual way. The test was just a formality to ease her mind before calling a doctor about these symptoms. In the privacy of her tiny apartment bathroom, Natalie followed the instructions on the box with trembling hands. 5 agonizing minutes later, she stared in disbelief at the result. 2 pink lines. Positive. She blinked, once, twice, as if the result might change. Her knees buckled and she sat on the cool tile floor, test clutched in her hand. "No," she breathed. "That's impossible." A mix of shock and alarm thundered in her chest, her pulse roaring in her ears. She tore open the second test from the box, barely registering the tear slipping down her cheek. This must be a mistake. It had to be, but the second test confirmed the first. Pregnant. Natalie's mind raced, trying to make sense of the senseless. She lived alone, worked long hours at an accounting firm, and spent weekends curled up with books or brunching with her best friend. There were no romantic entanglements, no drunken one-night stands tucked into forgotten memories. And yet the proof was undeniable. staring up at her from the little plastic stick. Natalie pressed a palm to her still flat belly, her breath coming fast and shallow. If this was true, and it certainly seemed to be, then how? Questions whipped through her. Could the tests be faulty? Could she be sick with something that causes false positives? She thought of the routine checkup, the inexplicable extra injection that day. A memory surfaced of that rush nurse and the mysterious syringe. Her heart skipped. No. Could that incident be connected? Grabbing her phone with shaking fingers, Natalie dialed her gynecologist's office. It was after hours, so she left a desperate message. "This is Natalie Thompson. I need to speak with Dr. Evans right away. It's urgent, please." By the time she hung up, hot tears of frustration and fear blurred her vision. She sank onto her sofa, wrapped in a blanket of unreality. How could this be happening? The clinic returned her call first thing the next morning, summoning her to discuss some test results. Natalie didn't even wait to change out of her wrinkled clothes from the sleepless night before. Within an hour, she was sitting across from Dr. Evans in his office, heart hammering as she demanded answers. "I took 2 pregnancy tests," she blurted, "and they were positive. There must be some mistake." Her voice trembled on the edge of hysteria, raw with confusion. Dr. Evans, a normally jovial middle-aged man, looked unusually grave. He folded his hands on the desk and nodded. "Natalie, please know we are investigating something very serious. You're right, there was a mistake." Hearing the word mistake made her stomach clench. The doctor continued carefully. "It appears there was a procedural error during your last visit. Another patient was meant to receive a treatment, and you were inadvertently given it instead." Natalie's eyes widened, dread creeping up her spine. "What kind of treatment?" she asked, though she already sensed the answer. The doctor cleared his throat, unable to meet her eyes. "An artificial insemination procedure." The room tilted around her. Artificial insemination. The syringe, the additional samples, it all clicked horrifically into place. They had impregnated her by mistake during what should have been a simple checkup. She felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. "Oh my God," Natalie whispered, fingers digging into the arms of her chair. Her mind flashed through a reel of life-altering images. A baby's heartbeat on an ultrasound. Her baby. A child she never planned or asked for. Anger flared white-hot behind her ribs, mingling with the panic. "How could this happen?" she cried, voice breaking. "How could you possibly—" "I am so sorry, Natalie," Dr. Evans said quietly. He looked genuinely pained. "We traced the error as soon as the intended patient reported not conceiving. We were about to reach out to you. The samples were mislabeled, and you were given the wrong injection. It's an error that should never happen." He kept talking, explaining how an investigation was underway, how the clinic's director wanted to speak with her, how of course all medical expenses would be covered. But Natalie only half heard him. One phrase echoed in her mind with sickening clarity. Intended patient. Intended sample. She suddenly realized there was another side to this equation. The father. Whose sample was it?" she managed to ask, her throat dry. At that, Dr. Evans looked even more uncomfortable. I'm afraid I can't release the patient's identity without consent. That's protected information." Natalie's temper snapped. "Protected information?" Her voice rose, sharp with disbelief. "You've injected me with a stranger's DNA without my consent, and you're worried about his privacy?" She stood up so fast the chair screeched against the tile. Never in her life had she felt such a storm of violation and fury. Her life, her body, had been upended by gross negligence, and now they expected her to accept a faceless explanation? "I want to speak to whoever's in charge. Now," she demanded, hands clenched at her sides. The meeting that followed, held in a larger conference room, felt surreal. The clinic's administrator, a silver-haired woman with a crisp suit and contrite smile, apologized profusely. Lawyers were mentioned. Confidentiality agreements slid across the table. Natalie barely touched the cup of water someone had placed in front of her, too focused on the file that lay closed in the administrator's hands. In it, she assumed, was information about the father, the person whose sperm now resided in her body, forming the cells of a child. She felt queasy all over again. "Ms. Thompson, we know this is a lot to process," the administrator said gently. "I want you to know the man who's—" Donation was used has been notified of the situation. Natalie's breath caught. They've told him. She hadn't expected that so soon. A spike of anxiety shot through her, and, she prompted, voice unsteady. What does he— She couldn't even form the sentence. Does he want the baby? Is he going to come after me? The administrator gave a tight smile meant to reassure. He has been very cooperative so far. He just wants to ensure that the situation is handled properly for everyone involved. Natalie frowned, not entirely comforted. Properly. What did properly mean to a stranger who never intended her to carry his child? A fresh wave of worry rolled through her, and she wrapped protective arms around her middle. As the meeting concluded, Natalie was left with a stack of documents to review. Offers of counseling, assurances that the clinic would support her decision whether to continue the pregnancy or not. There was even a proposed settlement agreement, complete with a substantial sum of money if she agreed not to pursue legal action. It all felt cold and transactional. She shoved the paperwork into her bag, stomach churning. One fact burned in her awareness. The father knows. She had no name, no face to attach to that title, but somewhere out there a man had received a phone call that his genetic material had been mistakenly given to an unsuspecting woman. How would he react? Was he furious? Horrified? Would he prefer she terminate the pregnancy? The thought made her instinctively cradle her abdomen. Despite the shock and anger, Natalie realized she already felt a fierce protectiveness for the life inside her. A life created without her intent, yes, but innocent of the circumstances. In just a day, the abstract idea of pregnancy had solidified into something achingly real. Her baby, however it had come to be. That evening, Natalie curled up on her couch, the city lights blinking outside her window, and tried to quiet her mind. She didn't know what to do next. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Hallie, asking about their upcoming weekend plans. Natalie bit her lip, hesitation paralyzing her. She hadn't told a soul what was happening. How could she possibly explain this nightmare? For now, she texted back something about needing to postpone, citing a work emergency. When she finally drifted to sleep in the early hours, Natalie dreamed of syringes and nameless faces, of reaching out for help and finding nothing but blurred outlines. She woke with her cheeks damp and her heart heavy. Everything had changed in an instant, and she was utterly unprepared for what lay ahead. Little did Natalie know, the storm had only begun. Far from her small apartment, the other half of this impossible equation was already in motion. A dangerous force of nature whose life, too, was about to veer irrevocably off course. Halfway across the city, in a penthouse office atop one of Manhattan's most exclusive high-rises, Dante Giordano ended a call and set his phone down with a deliberate calm that belied the turmoil inside him. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, dusk was deepening over the skyline, casting long shadows into the luxurious office. Dante's broad shoulders were tense beneath his tailored suit, and his dark storm-gray eyes stared unseeing at the sleek mahogany desk. He replayed the conversation in his mind, each word like a puzzle piece clicking into place, a puzzle that made less sense the more he considered it. There's been an incident at the Ashgrove Fertility Clinic, his personal attorney had informed him minutes ago. Your stored sample was used mistakenly. A woman has been impregnated. Dante had gone very still at those words, a rare shock rendering him speechless. At first he thought he'd misheard, but the lawyer's apologetic tone and the flurry of details that followed confirmed it. A mix-up, an unwitting woman, and a child. His child, if the science held true. Dante's mind had flashed to the reason that sample existed at all. 2 years ago, under pressure from his aging father and the board of the Giordano family enterprises, Dante had begun considering the need for an heir, not just for the business, but for the legacy of a family that had built an empire at the edge of the law for generations. Coldly pragmatic by nature, Dante had frozen his sperm as a precaution before a dangerous operation against a rival syndicate, unsure if he'd emerge alive. It was supposed to be an insurance policy for the future, one he never expected to cash in unless he found a suitable partner or chose a surrogate under carefully controlled conditions. Certainly not like this, with a stranger becoming the unwitting mother to his heir without his knowledge or hers. He rose from his leather chair, restlessness coursing through him, and walked to the window. Far below, the city streets gleamed, alive with countless stories, Dante's reflection looked back at him. Tall, dark-haired, face composed in an unreadable mask he'd perfected over years of cutthroat negotiations and dangerous encounters. But behind that mask, his thoughts churned. A child, my child. The idea was at once startling and strangely magnetic. He imagined a small life carrying his blood, imagined holding an infant that was a part of him. A vision that tugged at something deep in his chest he hadn't realized was there. Yet entangled with that nascent curiosity was a surge of protectiveness and anger. This shouldn't have happened without his consent. The clinic's error had potentially endangered a woman and an unborn baby, his baby. Dante ruled his world by maintaining control at all times. Now control had been wrested from him in the most intimate way. He thought of the woman. Natalie, the lawyer, had said her name was. A file with her information sat on his desk, delivered via secure courier moments after the call. Dante's jaw tightened. What must she be feeling? Confusion, certainly. Maybe terror if she realized who he was. The lawyer indicated she hadn't been told his identity yet. Confidentiality laws prevented that without his permission. But Dante knew it was only a matter of time. He had agreed to a meeting tomorrow at the clinic. A meeting with Natalie, facilitated by attorneys. The clinic wanted to smooth things over, avoid a scandal or lawsuit. They clearly hoped money would resolve it. He scoffed under his breath. Money was the least of his concerns. Dante Giordano had more wealth than he could spend in 100 lifetimes. No, his demands would be very different. If this woman truly carried his child, there was no way he would remain a distant third party. He would claim responsibility and ensure the safety and future of his offspring. His gaze hardened as he considered the many implications. Dante's world was not a safe one, at least not for outsiders. As head of the Giordano crime family, he had clawed his way to the throne after his father's semi-retirement, solidifying power through equal parts business acumen and fear. That power kept him and those under his protection safe, but it also painted a target on all he held dear. If rivals got wind that Dante Giordano had an heir on the way, he clenched his fists, quelling the surge of concern. I'll eliminate any threat before it gets close. The thought was as cold as steel, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. Turning away from the window, Dante strode back to his desk and opened the file on Natalie Thompson. A photo clipped to the first page drew his attention. A candid shot of a young woman with honey-brown hair and wary hazel eyes, caught in the middle of a hesitant smile. Dante found himself lingering on that image. There was a gentleness in her expression, an innocence. She looked utterly ordinary in the best way, like someone who led a life far removed from violence and power plays. A life I've never had. He scanned her background. 26 years old, New Jersey native, accountant at a mid-size firm, no criminal record, no known ties to any of his enemies. She had family, a mother in a nursing home upstate, a younger brother in college. No mention of a current partner. In fact, notes from a preliminary PI sweep hinted she'd broken off an engagement over a year ago. Dante felt a slight easing of tension in his chest at that detail, though he wouldn't examine why. As he closed the file, Dante's resolve sharpened. Natalie would undoubtedly have misgivings about him. If not now, then once she learned who he was. Convincing a stranger to cooperate in something as life-altering as raising a child together would be daunting for anyone, much less when that stranger was a mafia boss with blood on his hands. Dante's reputation preceded him like a dark shadow. To the public, he was a reclusive luxury real estate investor, but in the underworld he was known as a man who brokered no insult or betrayal without retribution. If Natalie looked him up, which she likely would, she'd find whispers of those rumors. He inhaled slowly, controlling the flare of frustration. It didn't matter. Whether she feared him or not, he would not walk away from this. She and the baby would have his protection, and with time he would make her see reason. They are mine to protect now. The thought was stark, possessive, and surprisingly comforting. That night Dante barely slept. Instead, he planned. By the time dawn crept over the city, he had mobilized his most trusted lieutenant to discreetly increase security around the fertility clinic and around Miss Thompson's neighborhood. No harm would come to her or the baby, not from his enemies, and not from any panic-driven choices. He also arranged for a private physician specializing in obstetrics to be on standby. He didn't trust the clinic any further than he could throw them after this debacle. When his driver pulled up to the clinic the next morning, Dante stepped out into a crisp autumn sun. He adjusted his suit jacket and squared his shoulders. The establishment had cleared its schedule for this clandestine meeting, and he was escorted through hushed corridors to a conference room. Dante could sense the fear rippling off the clinic administrators as they greeted him. They knew exactly who they were dealing with, even if they didn't dare say it. He responded with curt nods, his focus laser-sharp on the door through which Natalie would soon walk. She arrived a few minutes later, preceded by the murmur of a lawyer's voice. When she stepped into the room, Dante felt a curious jolt in his chest. Recognition, perhaps, from studying her photos so intently, but also something more visceral. Natalie paused just inside the doorway, eyes flickering over the assembled suits until they landed on him. Her hazel gaze locked with Dante's, and in that instant, the world around them seemed to fall away. Natalie's face went pale. She clearly knew who he was. Whether by instinct or research, the realization was written in her widening eyes. Dante saw her throat bob as she swallowed hard, pressing her back against the doorframe as if she might bolt. He rose slowly from his seat, one hand unconsciously reaching toward her in a calming gesture. "Ms. Thompson," he said, his deep voice gentle but firm. "Thank you for coming. I'm Dante Giordano." Silence stretched taut in the room. The clinic's lawyer motioned to a chair for Natalie, but she remained rooted in place. Dante could practically feel the panic rolling off her. She looked at him as though staring down a predator, a doe caught in the sights of a wolf. It stirred a pang of regret in him. "I don't want her fear," he thought, surprisingly troubled by it. "This woman is carrying my child." The protective urge surged again, stronger now seeing her in person. She was petite, maybe a foot shorter than him, dressed in a conservative blouse and slacks that hung a bit loose, no doubt from stress. A few strands of wavy brown hair had escaped her ponytail to frame a delicate face that currently held an expression of sheer overwhelm. At last, Natalie inhaled shakily and moved to the table, sitting as far from Dante as possible. The lawyers began talking, their practiced spiels about resolution and amicable agreement droning in the background. Dante watched Natalie instead. She kept her eyes fixed on a spot on the polished table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He noticed how those hands trembled and tucked them under the table to hide it. A strange urge gripped him. He wanted to reach out and still those hands, to reassure her that he meant no harm. But he held back, sensing she might shatter like glass if he moved too quickly. Finally, when the legal representatives paused to await a response, Dante spoke directly to her. "Natalie," he said, the taste of her name unfamiliar but not unpleasant on his tongue. "I know this is overwhelming. I'm as surprised as you are about what happened." He kept his tone measured, tempering his naturally authoritative demeanor. "But I want you to know one thing. I will take responsibility. I will ensure you and the baby are cared for." At that, Natalie's eyes snapped up to meet his, a spark of defiance breaking through the fear. "Cared for?" she echoed, voice unsteady. "Mr. Giordano, I don't even know you, and I certainly never asked for any of this." She made a vague gesture towards her abdomen. Dante inclined his head. "Nor did I," he agreed, choosing honesty. "But it's happened. We have to decide what to do going forward." She bit her lip, and Dante noticed it had a way of trembling when she was upset. "What I do going forward is my choice," Natalie said, quieter but firm. "This is my body, my life. I'm still wrapping my head around even having a baby." Her voice nearly cracked on that word, but she steadied. "I came to hear what you had to say, but if you think you can just snap your fingers and dictate how this goes..." She didn't finish, but the warning was implicit. Dante felt a flicker of admiration despite the circumstances. Natalie might be terrified, but she had courage. "I'm not here to dictate," he said carefully. "I'm here to offer my support and protection. As the father, I have a stake in this child's well-being too. I think we both want what's best for..." He hesitated, realizing he was about to say our child. That phrasing might be too presumptive for her right now. "For the baby," he finished. Natalie's brows drew together. "Protection? From what?" she asked warily. Dante exchanged a glance with his lawyer, who subtly shook his head. They had decided not to divulge too much about the dangers of his world to her yet. No need to compound her fear. But Natalie was perceptive. Her gaze shifted between the suited men flanking Dante and the way they deferred to him. She knew enough to be wary. Mr. Giordano deals in high-level business, the clinic's administrator interjected delicately. He merely means financial security and access to top medical care, of course. The woman smiled too brightly. Dante had to resist rolling his eyes. Natalie wasn't fooled. Her eyes came back to Dante's, searching. He held her gaze steadily. "I mean that I can keep you safe," he said softly, deciding on partial truth. "You and the baby will want for nothing. I have resources, connections. If you need prenatal specialists, they're yours. If you want security to ensure privacy, it's done." Natalie's throat worked. "And what do you expect in return?" she asked. There it was, the catch. Dante leaned forward slightly, fingers steepled. "Only to be part of the child's life," he replied. "And to keep you both safe. We can work out details. Visitation, custody, whatever legal frameworks you're comfortable with. But I won't walk away from my own flesh and blood, Ms. Thompson." At that, some intensity must have seeped into his voice despite his attempt to remain gentle, because Natalie flinched, her composure wavering. She closed her eyes for a moment, a few tears escaping despite her obvious attempt to hold them back. "This is so much," she whispered, voice thick. "Just a week ago I was just me. I had my quiet little life. And now—" She opened her eyes again and they glistened with emotion. "Now I have a crime lord offering me protection like I'm some damsel in a gangster movie." There was a faint edge of dark humor in her tone. Or maybe it was despair. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably at her frank description of Dante, but he let out a soft exhale. "I understand how absurd it seems," he said. "I won't force anything on you, Natalie." Hearing himself use her first name, he noticed a subtle softening in her guarded expression. "But please at least consider my help. The city can be dangerous even for someone without my affiliations. Paparazzi, extortionists. Once this gets out, you could be targeted. I can prevent that." Her brow furrowed as she absorbed his words. The mention of publicity struck a chord. She hadn't even considered that yet. Would the story leak? A medical scandal like this could easily hit the news, and if Dante Giordano's name was attached, Natalie suddenly saw a vision of reporters swarming her, flashing cameras as she tried to hide a growing belly. Her free hand fell protectively over her abdomen once more. Almost an unconscious gesture now. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked at last, exhaustion and resignation warring in her voice. "That I go into hiding under your watch? That I become, what, your responsibility?" The word responsibility dripped with distaste, and Dante couldn't fault her for it. He exchanged a quick look with his counsel before responding. "I have a secure estate outside the city," he said calmly. "If you were willing, you could stay there for some or all of the pregnancy. You'd have privacy, staff at your disposal, medical care. If not that, I can at least place security details near you here in Manhattan. Whatever level of support you accept, I will provide." Natalie stared at him as if seeing a stranger, which of course he was. She didn't answer immediately, instead lowering her gaze to the table. In the tense silence, Dante's heart did something unexpected. It squeezed with empathy. He tried to imagine how he would feel if he were in her position. An average person confronted with an extraordinary situation and an infamous stranger claiming a stake in her life. He realized it would be terrifying. And Natalie, for all her brave front, was clearly overwhelmed. The meeting wound down with no firm conclusions. Natalie was given a copy of the proposed agreement to review at her leisure, which included clauses about cooperation and confidentiality, plus generous financial compensation. Dante emphasized one last time that she could call him directly if she had any questions or needs, sliding a sleek black card with his personal cell number across to her. "Anytime, day or night," he had said, catching her gaze. "I mean that." She only nodded, hesitating before taking the card like it might burn her. As everyone stood to leave, a strange impulse gripped Dante. He extended his hand to her, a formal yet earnest gesture. "It truly is a pleasure to meet you, Natalie," he said quietly. "I wish it were under different circumstances, but I'm determined to make the best of this. I hope you'll see that." Natalie looked at his offered hand, then up at him. After a beat, she reached out and shook it. Dante felt the coolness of her small hand in his warm grasp. She trembled just a little, but she met his eyes with a glimmer of her earlier defiance. "I'll think about everything," she replied, voice soft but clear. That's the best I can promise right now. He inclined his head. That's fair. Reluctantly, he released her hand. Natalie turned and left, flanked by her own legal counsel, her posture stiff and uncertain. Dante watched the door close behind her, resisting the urge to follow. In that moment, Dante realized he already felt an undeniable pull toward this brave, frightened woman. She was carrying his child. That alone forged a powerful bond in his eyes. But beyond that, there was something about the way she had stood her ground that stirred him. He had the urge to shelter her, yes, but also an unexpected desire to know her. His lawyer cleared his throat, jarring Dante from his thoughts. "We'll proceed as discussed, sir?" Dante nodded, already striding out with purpose. He would give Natalie a little time, as she requested, but not too much. Until she made her decision, he would keep a careful watch from afar. She might have left the meeting unconvinced, perhaps intent on returning to her quiet little life. What Natalie didn't fully grasp, however, was that her life was no longer quiet, or little. It was entwined with Dante's now, whether she welcomed it or not. And Dante Giordano protected what was his with ruthless devotion. That protection would be needed sooner than either of them expected. Natalie shut the door of her apartment and immediately sagged back against it, shutting her eyes. Her heart was pounding as if she'd sprinted miles, though it had been only a short cab ride from the clinic. Dante Giordano. She whispered the name in her mind and a shiver danced over her skin. In the conference room, he had emanated power. Not just the wealth and confidence of a successful businessman, but a more dangerous aura. Even in his gentlest tone there was an edge of command. The way others deferred to him, the way his icy gray eyes observed every detail. It both unsettled and, in a strange way, reassured her, because underlying that danger, she had sensed a genuine resolve to safeguard her and the baby. Natalie exhaled shakily and opened her eyes. Her apartment looked exactly as she'd left it this morning. Cozy, lived in. A pile of mail on the console table, and a blanket tossed over the arm of the couch. But she felt like an intruder in her own home now. Everything had changed. With numb fingers, she pulled out her phone and did what she'd been resisting until now. She Googled Dante Giordano. As expected, a slew of results came up. Society page photos of a forbiddingly handsome man at charity galas, articles about his luxury hotel ventures, and then the murkier things, speculative pieces linking him to organized crime, whispers of violence cloaked in business jargon. Her stomach tightened reading the words. Reputed Mafia scion. Alleged ties to underworld. Too powerful to touch. She tossed the phone aside, running her hands through her hair. How is this real? She felt like the heroine of some dark thriller, not Natalie Thompson, steady CPA and average nobody. A cynical laugh bubbled up before she could stop it. She glanced down at her flat midsection. Baby, she murmured aloud. What have we gotten ourselves into? The silence that followed felt heavy with implications. The remainder of the day passed in a fog. Natalie tried to work from home, spreadsheets and tax forms she'd brought with her, but concentration was impossible. By evening, she realized she needed to get out of her own head for a bit. She decided to go to the one place that always calmed her, the bookstore a few blocks away where she often spent her free time. Pulling on a light jacket, Natalie stepped out into the brisk air. Dusk had fallen, and the city hummed with its usual energy. Cars honking, people bustling past with coffees and briefcases. To her jumpy nerves, everything felt like it was in hyper-focus. The chatter of two women passing behind her made her startle. A delivery truck backfiring at the corner made her heart leap. Get a grip, she scolded herself. Not every sound was a threat. Yet as she walked, she couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Halfway down the block, she paused and glanced over her shoulder. Nothing obvious, just a man in a pea coat checking his watch, a couple walking arm in arm. Natalie bit her lip. Was she being paranoid, or had Dante already deployed his promised security to shadow her? She wouldn't put it past him. The thought that unseen eyes might be tracking her movements was both creepy and oddly comforting. If they were his people, at least any other ill-meaning stranger might be deterred. At the bookstore, Natalie wandered the aisles aimlessly. Usually the smell of ink and paper soothed her, but tonight her mind refused to quiet. She replayed the meeting over and over. Dante's deep voice saying, "I will take responsibility." The way he'd looked at her, steady and unblinking, when he said he wouldn't walk away from his child. A part of her she hardly dared acknowledge felt a glimmer of something like gratitude. Her own father had walked away from her family when she was a toddler, vanishing from their lives. She grew up watching her mother struggle to raise 2 kids alone. The scars of that abandonment ran deep. And here was a man, a dangerous, powerful man, who could have easily signed a hush agreement and sent her off with a check. But instead he wanted involvement. It was overwhelming, yes, but also strangely honorable in its own way. Natalie caught herself absent-mindedly running a hand over a book's spine while lost in thought. Did she dare trust that Dante's intentions were good? He might insist on being part of the baby's life. But what did that mean? Occasional visits? Co-parenting? Did he expect her to move into his mansion and play house? The uncertainty was gnawing. A sudden crash jolted her out of her reverie. Natalie peeked around the bookshelf to see that a display near the entrance had toppled, scattering books everywhere. A couple of staff members rushed to clean it up, apologizing to a customer who stood nearby. The customer, a tall, stocky man with a baseball cap, waved it off, but as he turned, his eyes flickered around the store with an alertness that seemed out of place for someone who just knocked over a pile of novels. Natalie felt a prickle of unease when his gaze skated past her. She stepped back behind the shelf, her heart now thumping faster. Something about him. She couldn't say what, but an instinct told her to be careful. Checking out a book could wait. She decided to leave. Perhaps her nerves were in overdrive, but all she wanted was the safety of her apartment again. As Natalie exited the bookstore, she glanced around surreptitiously for the man in the cap. He was nowhere to be seen. Pulling her jacket tighter, she quickened her pace down the street. The sooner she got home, the better. Lamps on the sidewalk had just flickered on, pools of golden light guiding her way. Just half a block more to her building, she could see the familiar green awning. Suddenly, footsteps sounded behind her, brisk and heavy. Before she could react, a large hand clamped on her upper arm. "Don't make a sound!" A rough voice hissed in her ear, sending a bolt of terror through Natalie. Her mind flashed to the self-defense classes Hallie had dragged her to last year. Stall. Assess. Her pulse skyrocketed. She was being grabbed on a public street. How? Why? She hadn't even processed who it was. The baseball cap man? Someone else? Adrenaline surging. Natalie instinctively tried to twist free, opening her mouth to scream. But the man was ready. He yanked her back against a solid chest and pressed something sharp against her ribs. A knife. She froze, icy dread flooding her veins as she felt the tip through her blouse. "Help!" She managed to choke out a half-scream before fear closed her throat. It all happened in seconds. A dark sedan screeched to a halt at the curb just ahead, its back door flung open. The man began dragging her toward it. Natalie dug her heels in, struggling wildly despite the blade. "Let go of me," she cried, panic making her voice high. She thought of the tiny life inside her, and a fierce desperation took hold. She couldn't let them take her. Using every ounce of will, Natalie threw her body weight to the side, off-balancing her assailant for a precious heartbeat. That was when chaos erupted. From seemingly out of nowhere, 2 figures in black barreled into them. Natalie felt the whoosh of air as one man tackled her attacker with brutal force, sending the knife skittering across the sidewalk. Another man, leaner with a swift grace, shoved her aside out of the melee. She stumbled to the ground, breath coming in ragged gasps, and watched in shock as a flurry of fists and kicks disabled her would-be kidnapper in mere moments. The man in the cap hit the pavement, unconscious or close to it, blood trickling from a split eyebrow. Before she could process anything further, the lean man who had pushed her clear knelt at her side. "Ms. Thompson, are you hurt?" he asked urgently. Natalie stared at him. He looked to be in his 30s, athletic, with a coiled readiness in his stance. His eyes, sharp and brown, scanned her for injuries. She realized he knew her name. The pieces clicked. Dante's security. He had been watching her after all. And thank God. I'm okay, she stammered, though she wasn't entirely sure if that was true. Everything was still a blur of adrenaline. Her arm throbbed where she'd been grabbed, and fear aftershocks trembled through her limbs. The baby. She hadn't fallen hard, just onto her hands and knees. But terror gripped her anew, thinking something could have happened. I'm pregnant, she managed to say to the man, one hand instinctively moving to her belly. "Please," The security man nodded briskly. "We know. Let's get you out of here. The situation is contained." As he helped her up, Natalie saw the other guard zip-tie the wrists of the downed attacker and speak into a headset, likely calling for backup or a cleanup crew. It struck her as absurd and horrifying that such clandestine violence and response could occur in plain view, yet unnoticed by the public. But that was New York. A couple of onlookers across the street were gaping, but one of Dante's men flashed a badge and they quickly moved on, likely mistaking them for police. The guard guided her firmly toward a black SUV that had now pulled up to the curb. Natalie's knees wobbled, but she let him lead her. There was safety with these men. She felt that now in her bones. Once she was settled in the back seat, the two men swiftly joined her, one in the driver's seat and the other beside her. The locks clicked shut with a heavy thunk. Natalie exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Safe. For the moment. The SUV sped off, and for the first time Natalie got a clear look at the man next to her, the one who had first come to her aid. He must have noticed her scrutiny because he gave a faint smile. "Marco Spinelli," he introduced himself. "I work for Mr. Giordano." Natalie let out a shaky laugh. "Of course you do," she said, voice quivering. "He said he'd protect me. I guess I didn't realize he meant literally around the clock." Marco's expression was unapologetic. "With all due respect, miss, after this incident, I'm glad we were watching. You should be too." She sobered, pressing a hand against her temple as a dull ache formed. "I am," she whispered. "I don't even know who that was." The driver, a burly man with close-cropped hair, spoke up. "Viktor Petrov's crew," he said grimly, eyes on the road. "We recognized the guy. He's muscle for the Petrov Bratva." Natalie blinked, not understanding. Marco clarified. "Russian mob. Petrov likely caught wind of the situation at the clinic. This was an attempt to grab leverage over Dante." He paused, glancing at her meaningfully. "You and the baby are that leverage." The bottom fell out of Natalie's stomach. She had suspected Dante's talk of danger might be more than paranoia, but hearing it spelled out was chilling. In a flash, she saw how naive she'd been thinking she could just go to a bookstore, live normally, while carrying the child of a mafia boss. She was a target now. The reality crashed over her. By sheer accident of fate, she and her unborn baby were pieces on a deadly chessboard. Her hands started to tremble anew, and tears of shock pricked her eyes. "It's okay," Marco said quietly, perhaps noticing her reaction. "You're safe now. We're taking you to Mr. Giordano." At that, a different kind of shiver coursed through her, a mixture of relief and apprehension. Dante. She would see him again tonight, apparently. And after this, how could she refuse whatever he asked? He had essentially saved her life, saved her baby's life. The thought made her chest tighten with emotion. Natalie leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. She pictured Dante's face in the conference room, how intense yet controlled he had been. Under that polished control, she sensed a ferocity. Now she comprehended it better. The world he lived in was ruthless. And now, because of the clinic's mistake, her world had collided with his. The only consolation was that Dante seemed intent on keeping her safe, and thus far he'd proven he could. After a short, tense drive, the SUV entered a private underground garage beneath an upscale apartment tower. Natalie barely registered the elegant lobby they whisked her through, or the quiet elevator ride up to the penthouse floor. Her mind was still replaying the attack in terrifying loops. The vice-like grip on her arm, the glint of the knife, the heart-stopping moment of trying to scream. She realized belatedly that she hadn't contacted her family or Hallie. They'd have no idea she was in trouble, or that she'd disappeared. In her purse, her phone buzzed. Likely Hallie now, worried since Natalie had ignored earlier messages. Before she could reach for it, the elevator doors opened directly into a stunning foyer of a penthouse. Warm light bathed marble floors and modern art hung on textured walls. It was the epitome of luxury and security. Clearly Dante's domain. Marco gently touched her elbow. "Come, let's get you comfortable. Boss is on his way." They guided her into a spacious living area, where floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a glittering night skyline. The room was tastefully furnished with Italian leather and dark wood, but Natalie barely took it in. She sank onto a sofa, exhaustion and shock catching up. The adrenaline crash made her limbs feel like lead. Marco disappeared briefly and returned with a glass of water, which she accepted gratefully, sipping to soothe her dry throat. 1,000 thoughts jumbled in her mind. She knew one thing for certain now. She couldn't handle this alone. Not the threats, not the constant fear. Dante's earlier proposal for protection was no longer a choice. It was a necessity. She placed a hand over her abdomen and made a silent promise. I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe, little one. If that meant leaning on Dante Giordano and entering his fortress, so be it. She didn't have to wait long. A door across the apartment opened, and Dante strode in like a tempest given human form. Natalie stood instinctively as he approached. His expression was a mix of barely contained fury and worry, a crack in his polished veneer that revealed the tempest underneath. Natalie, he said, almost a sigh of relief upon seeing her upright and seemingly unharmed. Without hesitation, Dante closed the distance and, to her surprise, gently cupped her shoulders, his eyes roaming over her as if checking for injury. Dio mio, I'm sorry, he murmured, the faintest tremor in his deep voice. I never wanted you to be thrown into danger like this. The warmth of his hands through her thin jacket and the genuine concern in his gaze undid the last of Natalie's composure. They tried to take me, she whispered, voice trembling. Saying it aloud made it real all over again. They knew about the baby, about me. If your men hadn't... Her throat closed up, words failing. Dante's eyes darkened with anger at the thought. But they didn't succeed, he said firmly. You're safe here. I promise you, no one will harm you under my roof. There was such conviction, such protective ferocity in those words, that Natalie felt a sudden flood of safety wash over her. Before she knew it, she was collapsing against him, the trauma spilling out in silent sobs against Dante's chest. He stiffened for a half-second, likely unaccustomed to people clutching him. But then one strong arm wrapped around her back, the other cradling her head. He held her securely as she shook, his hand stroking gently through her hair in a slow, comforting rhythm. Natalie felt the hard muscles of his chest rise and fall as he breathed, a steady anchor in the storm of her emotions. It's okay, Dante murmured against her hair. You're okay now, Natalie. I've got you. Those simple phrases, I've got you, broke through her walls. For the first time since this nightmare began, she truly let herself feel the fear and relief. She clung to Dante's expensive suit jacket, fingers curled in the fabric, and let the tears come. He simply held her, patient and solid, until the tide ebbed. When she finally pulled back, sniffling and embarrassed by her outburst, Dante didn't let her retreat far. He kept his hands on her upper arms, scanning her face with care. Sit, he urged softly, guiding her back to the sofa. He knelt in front of her, eye level, which struck her as something few men of his stature would do. Tell me if you're hurt. Did he cut you? His gaze flickered to her abdomen. Is the baby... He didn't finish, but his unspoken question hung in the air. Natalie shook her head, wiping her cheeks. I think we're okay, she said. He held a knife, but I don't feel any wound. I fell down, but it wasn't hard. She placed her hand protectively on her stomach and added, almost in wonder, I think the baby's fine. Saying that aloud steadied her. Despite everything, the baby was safe inside her. Dante's posture relaxed a fraction. Good. A dangerous glint reignited in his eyes as he added, The man who tried this won't get a second chance. I'll see to that. The cold fury underneath his calm tone was unmistakable. Natalie shivered, not at Dante, but at remembering her attacker's voice and the feel of that knife. They said Petrov, she whispered. Your men. That someone named Petrov was behind it. Dante nodded grimly. Viktor Petrov. He leads a Bratva cell that's been encroaching on our territory. We've had tensions, but nothing open. This is a declaration of war. He sighed, running a hand through his jet-black hair. For the first time, Natalie noticed Dante looked a bit tired around the edges. Faint shadows under his eyes, maybe from sleepless worry since yesterday. I'm sorry, she said softly. Dante's eyes snapped to hers in surprise. You're sorry? For what? She swallowed. For all of this. If the clinic hadn't... She struggled for words. I'm dragging you into a mess too. Now you have another vulnerability to worry about. She gestured vaguely to herself, recalling his earlier argument about danger. Dante made a low sound. something akin to a growl of disagreement. "None of this is your fault. The blame lies with that clinic and now with Petrov. And trust me," his jaw set hard, "I will rectify both. I've already had a very pointed conversation with the clinics, bored about their security lapse. There was a fearsome glint in his eye that made Natalie almost pity those administrators. Almost. He continued, voice gentler. As for Petrov, he will regret even thinking of you as a pawn. I'll deal with him soon enough." A silence fell. Natalie believed him. Dante spoke with such conviction she felt that if he promised to hang the moon, he'd find a way. And while a part of her was unsettled by the violence that swirled around him, another part felt relief bordering on gratitude that someone so formidable was on her side. Dante glanced at Marco and the other guard, who had been waiting discreetly by the foyer. "Marco, thank you. I'll talk with you and Sal later about tightening our net." The two men nodded and departed quietly, leaving Natalie and Dante alone in the spacious living room. Now that the immediate crisis had passed and they were alone, a certain awkwardness crept in. Natalie realized she was still holding onto Dante's forearm lightly, as if unwilling to break the physical reassurance. She flushed and withdrew her hand. "I suppose I should thank you," she said, offering a tentative smile. "I already did, but truly, Dante, if your men hadn't been there..." His expression softened at her use of his first name. "You don't need to thank me. Protecting you is my responsibility now." He paused, then added with a touch of self-reproach. "Though I should apologize. I underestimated how fast our enemies would learn of the situation. I thought we had more time." Natalie shook her head, a strand of her hair falling loose. "You warned me. I didn't really believe it until now." She managed a rueful chuckle. "I even tried to convince myself I could just carry on normally." Her face fell. "That was foolish." "Not foolish," Dante said softly. "Hopeful. You didn't ask for any of this madness. It's only natural you wanted to cling to normalcy." The understanding in his tone made tears prick at her again, but she blinked them back. He rose then, moving to sit beside her on the sofa rather than kneeling. "Natalie," he said, turning toward her, "I know tonight has been traumatic, but it reinforces what I was trying to tell you earlier. You and the baby need protection around the clock. I meant it when I offered my estate or any secure location of your choice. After this, would you please consider staying here, at least until we neutralize the immediate threat?" She looked around at the lavish penthouse, a far cry from her cozy one-bedroom. Staying here with him, it was daunting. Yet the thought of returning to her apartment, alone and vulnerable, was now out of the question. Natalie nodded slowly. "Yes, I will stay. I'll do whatever is necessary to keep the baby safe." A flicker of relief crossed Dante's face, tension easing from his shoulders. "Thank you," he said, sounding sincere. "You won't regret it. I'll make sure you have everything you need, and that you're comfortable." He stood and extended a hand to help her up. "Come, let me show you to a guest suite. You can rest, and I'll have some food sent up if you're hungry." Now that he mentioned it, Natalie realized she was starving. The shock had worn off enough for hunger to assert itself. "That would be nice," she admitted. She placed her hand in his, allowing him to pull her gently to her feet. The touch was brief but left her palm tingling. She felt suddenly self-conscious. Her clothes were dusty from the fall, her face surely blotchy from crying. Yet Dante treated her as if she were a queen being escorted in a palace, one hand lightly at the small of her back as he guided her down a hallway. He opened the door to a beautiful suite, a spacious bedroom with an adjoining sitting area and a balcony that overlooked the city. The lights of Manhattan twinkled beyond the glass doors like fallen stars. The decor was elegant in soothing hues of cream and silver, clearly prepared with care. On the bed lay a few folded clothing items that Natalie suspected were for her, perhaps purchased in anticipation of her stay, since she had arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back. She approached the bed and realized the items included a soft-looking set of pajamas and toiletries on the nightstand. Natalie's throat tightened at this thoughtful provision. He anticipated everything. The weight of the evening's events pressed on her, and she suddenly longed for nothing more than a hot shower and to crawl under the covers. Dante lingered by the door, as if reluctant to leave her just yet. "My room is at the end of the hall if you need anything. Marco will be right outside this suite all night as well." He hesitated, then added, "Try to get some rest. I know it won't be easy after what happened, but you're safe here. I give you my word." Natalie met his gaze. He'd done so much for her already, and despite the bizarre circumstances, she did feel safe near him. "I trust you," she found herself saying softly. "Good night, Dante." A slight easing of the stern line of his mouth indicated a smile. "Good night, Natalie." He withdrew, gently closing the door behind him. The moment he was gone, Natalie sat heavily on the edge of the plush bed. Trust. She'd said she trusted him, and surprisingly, she realized it was true. In Dante's arms, she had felt a security she hadn't felt in years. It was too soon and too strange to label those feelings. But she was grateful beyond measure not to be alone in this anymore. She stood and began to undress, catching a glimpse of herself in a large mirror above a dresser. Her reflection showed a young woman whose life had been turned upside down. Hair messy, eyes wide with residual fear, a faint bruise forming on her forearm where she'd been grabbed. But there was something else in her expression too, a hint of resilience. She was still standing, and now she had an unlikely ally. As she changed into the provided pajamas, soft cotton that fit well enough, Natalie wondered at how fate worked. Just days ago, Dante Giordano had been a name on a clinic file. Now he was so much more. A protector, the father of her child, a man who had held her as she cried and vowed to keep her safe. The situation was far from normal, far from the life she'd imagined. But despite the lingering fear, she felt a spark of hope. Perhaps it was simply the relief of not facing this alone. A knock at the suite door startled her slightly. "Miss Thompson?" came a muffled female voice. "Room service." Natalie opened the door to find a kindly older woman in a chef's uniform wheeling in a cart bearing covered dishes. The savory aroma hit Natalie's nose, reminding her she was famished. "Mr. Giordano asked me to bring you some dinner, dear," the woman said warmly. She set a tray on a small table by the window. Soup, salad, and some toast. Gentle on the stomach, she gave Natalie a grandmotherly smile. "Anything else I can get you?" Natalie shook her head, touched by the thoughtfulness. "Thank you so much. This is perfect." After the woman left, Natalie ate slowly, gazing out at the breathtaking view. The soup was a comforting tomato bisque, the salad crisp and fresh. With each bite, she felt some strength returning. Outside, New York glittered, oblivious to the dramas of its inhabitants. But here, in Dante's fortress in the sky, her life had irrevocably changed course. That night, after showering and crawling into the luxurious bed, Natalie expected to lie awake replaying the attack. And she did for a short while, heart stuttering at the dark memory. But whenever the fear surged, she countered it by recalling Dante's embrace and the fierce promise in his voice. "You're safe." Eventually, cocooned in warmth and utterly exhausted, Natalie drifted into a heavy sleep. She dreamed of curious things, of wolves standing guard in the dark, of a strong hand clasping hers as they ran through a maze, of a tiny heartbeat echoing softly within her. Through it all, a figure stayed by her side, tall, protective, cloaked in shadow, but with eyes that glowed like silver. When she woke once in the middle of the night, disoriented in the unfamiliar room, she almost expected to see Dante watching over her. She felt an odd pang at his absence, but soothed herself with the reality that he was just down the hall, a call away. As dawn's first light filtered into the room, Natalie realized this was the first morning of her new life, one where she lived under the protection of a Mafia boss and carried his unborn child. It sounded like something out of the novels she would read at that bookstore, except this was real, and her heart was already entangled in ways she couldn't yet understand. Over the next several weeks, Natalie's life took on a surreal new rhythm. She remained ensconced in Dante's penthouse, which effectively became both her refuge and her gilded cage. Dante insisted she treat it as her home, and indeed he provided every comfort. A closet of maternity clothes that appeared as if by magic as her waist began to thicken, a private doctor who made discreet house calls to check on her and the baby's progress, and even a makeshift office set up so she could attempt to work remotely for her job. The world beyond those secure walls faded into a hazy memory. Natalie ventured out only for critical doctor appointments, and always under heavy guard. She spoke to her mother and brother by phone, crafting half-truths about a high-risk pregnancy that required bed rest. She hated lying, but the fantastical truth was impossible. Her best friend Hallie was harder to fool. She sensed something was off. Natalie promised to explain everything eventually. How could she possibly tell her normal, sweet friend that she was essentially living with the mob? Despite the circumstances, those days were not unhappy. In fact, some were almost peaceful, even sweet in their own way. As the initial shock and fear ebbed, a daily routine emerged in which Dante was a steady fixture. Most mornings, he joined Natalie for breakfast at a sunny nook overlooking the city. At first, their conversations were tentative and polite. She thanked him often for all he was doing, and he waved it off, reminding her it was necessary and that he wanted to. But gradually, formality gave way to genuine connection. Natalie learned that Dante liked his coffee strong and black, and that he had a weakness for blueberry pancakes, though he'd never admit it aloud. One of the chefs spilled that secret to her. He learned that Natalie needed ginger tea to help her morning nausea, and that she had an affinity for classical piano music when she felt anxious. One day, she mentioned offhand that as a child she played the piano but hadn't touched one in years. The next day, a beautiful keyboard appeared in the living room, with Dante casually saying he thought music might help pass the time. Moments like that left Natalie both charmed and unsettled by the ease with which Dante could make things happen. He seemed determined to anticipate her every need, which was endearing, but it also meant that they spent a lot of time together, more than she had expected. She thought a man as powerful as him would be constantly outmanaging his empire, but Dante reassured her he could handle much of it from home for now, given the circumstances. And perhaps, a small voice in her head suggested, he wants to be near. Their relationship, if she could call it that, was a delicate dance of unspoken boundaries and slowly eroding walls. Dante was ever the gentleman, never pushing physical closeness beyond a guiding hand on her back or the occasional brush of his fingers against hers when he handed her something. Yet Natalie found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the way his brow furrowed in concentration during a chess game they played to while away an evening, or the rare, boyish grin that escaped when she teased him for underestimating her game strategy. Each day, her comfort with him grew, and so did an undercurrent of attraction that she tried to ignore. One crisp afternoon, as October leaves swirled outside, Dante returned from a meeting with his security team with grim news. He found Natalie curled up on the sofa with a book, her one hand resting unconsciously on the slight swell of her belly, a sight that made something warm flutter in his chest. He almost hated to disturb the peace in her expression. "Natalie," he began gently, taking a seat across from her. She looked up, immediately reading the seriousness in his features and closing her book. "What is it?" Dante clasped his hands, a gesture she recognized as him measuring his words. "We have new intelligence on Petrov," he said. "He's gone to ground, but we think he's regrouping for another attempt." Natalie's stomach clenched. Though the past weeks had been quiet, she lived with the underlying awareness that Petrov was still out there, still a threat. "Okay," she said softly. "What does that mean for us?" His eyes softened at her inclusion of us, but his tone stayed factual. "It means I have to take proactive measures. I won't wait for him to strike again. I have allies in the city, other families who also want Petrov contained. We're coordinating." There was a fierceness to Dante as he discussed strategy that both scared and reassured her. "Coordinating, as in war?" she asked hesitantly. Dante sighed, rubbing his chin. "Hopefully it won't come to open conflict. If we can corner him quietly and force a truce or remove him, that would be ideal." He didn't elaborate on remove, but Natalie understood. She swallowed, nodding. Violence as a solution still made her uneasy. But when she thought of that knife at her ribs, her empathy for Petrov's fate dwindled. Dante leaned forward, resting his forearms on his thighs. "However, until this is resolved, I need to tighten security even more. I think it's time to move you to my estate outside the city." He raised a hand to preempt her protest. She hadn't even decided if she'd object, but he clearly expected some. "You'll be far safer there than in Manhattan. It's more isolated and fortified. I have a private airfield to move at a moment's notice and an army of guards patrolling the perimeter." Natalie absorbed this. She had grown somewhat comfortable here. It was luxurious, yes, but also confined. Yet at least it was in the city she knew. Moving to his estate felt more permanent, more Intimate, even if logically it made sense. "When were you thinking of going?" she asked. Dante's lips quirked in a half-smile at her practical response. "As soon as possible. Tomorrow, if you're up for it." She appreciated that he phrased it as her choice, though she suspected he would insist if she declined. But she wasn't going to decline. "All right," she agreed. "Tomorrow." Relief touched his features. "Thank you for trusting me on this." Natalie attempted a light grin. "You're kind of hard to say no to, you know." He raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" She blushed slightly and changed the subject. "Your estate? It's in the country? Upstate on a lake. It's secluded. I think you might like it, actually. It's quieter than here. Fresh air. Lots of space." She noted a trace of something in his tone, like he truly hoped she'd like it. "It sounds nice," she admitted. "I haven't been outside the city in a long time." Dante nodded, and an easy silence settled as they both contemplated the move. Natalie realized she didn't even have that much to pack. She'd left her old apartment weeks ago with just an overnight bag, never imagining she wouldn't return. Dante had already sent some of his staff to retrieve personal items from her apartment, another violation of normalcy, hearing that his people rifled through her things. But they'd brought back her favorite pillow and photo albums, which made her forgive the intrusion. As she looked at Dante, his profile strong against the late afternoon light, she thought of all he'd done and sacrificed to keep her safe so far. He had upended his own routines, possibly risked his standing by appearing vulnerable to his enemies. And all for someone who had been a stranger not long ago. "Dante," she said suddenly, making him turn to her. "Why are you doing all this?" He frowned slightly. "We've been over this. It's for the baby's—" "No, I know," she interrupted gently. "I mean, you could have handled this very differently. You could have paid me off, or had me hidden away in some secure location with guards, rather than staying by my side. But you're here, with me. You're making sure I'm all right at every turn. Why?" Her heart pounded in the silence that followed. It was a bold question, one she had held in for a while. Dante's face was unusually vulnerable as he considered his answer. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the skyline before speaking. "I asked myself the same early on," he said quietly. "Initially it was simple duty, my responsibility, but somewhere along the line—" He trailed off, then turned to meet her gaze, his steel-gray eyes softer than she'd ever seen. "Somewhere along the line it became more than that. I found that protecting you, caring for you, I wanted to do it, not just because of the baby, but because it's you. I can't fully explain it, Natalie. Perhaps it's been the circumstances forcing us together, or perhaps—" He took a slow breath. "Perhaps it's that in you I see someone I've been searching for without knowing it." Natalie's breath caught. The room seemed to go very still. She rose to her feet, their eyes locked. "Dante," she whispered, unsure what to say. Her cheeks felt warm and her heart thudded. "In you I see someone I've been searching for." The words resonated through her, at once exhilarating and terrifying. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. There was a gravity between them, an almost magnetic pull that had been growing day by day and now felt impossible to ignore. When Dante raised a hand, he did it slowly, giving her time to move away. She didn't. His fingers grazed her cheek, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Tell me to stop and I will," he murmured. Natalie's voice wavered as she replied, "I don't want you to stop." A quiet sound escaped him, something like relief, maybe even joy. Dante tilted her chin up gently and lowered his head. Natalie's eyes fluttered closed just as his lips met hers. The kiss was soft, cautious at first, as if he was afraid she might break. But when she sighed against him and leaned in, her hands resting against his chest for balance, Dante's arm circled her waist and drew her closer. The kiss deepened, warmth blooming in Natalie's chest and spreading outwards like the first rays of sunrise breaking a long night. She felt safe and alive all at once in his embrace. Her senses drank in everything, the clean spice of his cologne, the surprising tenderness of a man so strong, the way her heart raced in a pleasant frenzy. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Dante rested his forehead against hers. His hand splayed protectively across the small of her back, and it made her realize he was subtly supporting her weight, mindful of her condition as always. Natalie opened her eyes to find him watching her with such open affection that it nearly stole her breath again. "I didn't expect that," she whispered with a shy smile. Dante's lips curved. "Neither did I, if I'm honest. But I have no regrets." He brushed the pad of his thumb over her lower lip, the gesture intimate and reverent. "You are extraordinary, Natalie. How you've handled everything. Your strength, your kindness. It's no wonder." He stopped, a rare uncertainty crossing his features. "No wonder what?" she prompted gently, covering his hand with hers. He hesitated only a second. "No wonder I'm falling in love with you." The words were spoken quietly, but they hung in the air, electrifying. Natalie felt a joyous swell in her chest that left her almost dizzy. She hadn't let herself name her own feelings, not yet. But hearing his sparked an answering flame. "Dante," she murmured, eyes shining. A sudden rap on the door interrupted them, followed by Marco's apologetic voice. "Boss? Sorry, but there's an urgent call." Dante closed his eyes for a brief second, collecting himself. "I'll be right there," he replied, not taking his eyes off Natalie. He searched her face, as if to make sure this moment was real and mutual. Natalie responded by standing on tiptoe and pressing a swift, reassuring kiss to his lips, the boldness of it making them both smile. "We'll continue this later," she said softly. Dante's answering look promised that they would. He left to handle the call, and Natalie sank back onto the couch, fingers lightly touching her lips. Her world felt like it had shifted on its axis yet again, but this time, in a wonderful way. He loves me, the thought sent butterflies through her. And the realization that she was very much on the path to loving him back settled warmly in her heart. However, the tender moment was soon overshadowed. That urgent call turned out to be news that forced Dante's hand quicker than anticipated. Petrov had made a move, a violent confrontation with one of Dante's allied families at a warehouse by the docks. There were casualties, and Petrov slipped away once more. The war was no longer cold. It had ignited. By nightfall, Dante's estate upstate was readied, and they decided to depart at first light. The evening was a flurry of activity, security teams organizing transport, additional guards arriving. Dante was on calls for hours, his demeanor shifting fully into the ruthless leader mode that Natalie had only glimpsed before. Watching him give orders in rapid Italian and terse English, she was reminded just how powerful and dangerous he could be. Yet when he caught her watching, he offered a gentle nod or a quick squeeze of her hand in passing, silently apologizing for neglecting her in the chaos. Late that night, Natalie struggled to sleep, anxious about what lay ahead. She finally gave up and wandered out of her suite, drawn to a dim light coming from Dante's office. The door was slightly ajar. She peeked in to find him sitting at his desk, elbows on the polished wood and head in his hands. He looked weary, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily. Natalie knocked softly on the doorframe. Dante's head snapped up, eyes alert until he saw it was her. Some tension eased from his face, replaced by concern. "Can't sleep?" he asked, voice low. She stepped inside. "Too much on my mind." "What about you?" She gestured to him. He certainly wasn't sleeping either. Dante managed a small smile. "Too much on my mind," he echoed. He extended a hand, and she went to him, letting him draw her into his lap. It was a mark of how natural their closeness had become that she didn't hesitate. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, Natalie resting her head against his shoulder as he softly stroked her arm. Despite the worries swirling around them, she felt content in that little oasis of calm. After a while, Dante murmured, "We'll leave early and get you far away from this volatility. Once you're safe, I can focus on ending this." She frowned, lifting her head. "Ending this? With Petrov?" He nodded, jaw tightening. "I won't have him menace our family." Her heart skipped at our family. He said it so naturally, but another part of his statement nagged at her. "When you say I can focus, do you mean I won't see you for a while?" He hesitated, and she saw the answer in his eyes. "It might be safer if I handle things directly. I don't want to draw any fire towards the estate." Natalie sat up straighter in his lap, anxiety rising. "So you plan to drop me off in a safe house and go to war, essentially?" Dante's brow creased. "It won't be as dramatic as that, hopefully. But yes, I may need to be away for stretches. It's temporary, Kara. Just until it's finished." Her chest constricted painfully. One part of her understood logically. He had to neutralize the threat to ensure a peaceful life for them later. But another part, the part deeply attached to him now, recoiled at the idea of him walking into danger while she sat waiting, helpless. She caught his hand, gripping it tightly. "Promise me you'll be careful," she whispered. "Promise you'll come back." She hated how vulnerable she sounded, but she needed to hear it. Dante's eyes gentled. He cupped her face in both hands. "I swear to you, I'll do everything in my power to come back safe and quickly. I have too much to live for now." His hand drifted down to rest against her belly, and Natalie covered it with her own, intertwining their fingers over the gentle swell. "We both need you," she said softly. He kissed her then, a slow, tender kiss that conveyed both reassurance and longing. When they parted, Dante brushed away a tear she hadn't realized escaped. "Try to rest," he murmured. "We have an early start." Reluctantly, she returned to her suite. That night, sleep was fitful. She dreamed of thunder and lightning crashing over a dark lake, of searching for Dante in a storm and finding only shadows. When she woke before dawn, she found herself already dressed and ready to leave, nerves jangling. The transition to the estate was swift and efficient. Dante, Natalie, and a convoy of security vehicles left Manhattan as the sun was rising, slipping out under the cover of relative quiet. He insisted she ride with him in a discreet SUV rather than his more conspicuous town car. The journey upstate took a couple of hours. Dante remained tense and vigilant throughout, one hand never far from hers. Natalie watched the cityscape give way to rolling autumn-colored hills, heart heavy with a mix of hope and dread. The Giordano estate turned out to be breathtaking. 17 acres of private woodland on the edge of a crystal-clear lake, with a grand stone manor that looked like something out of the 1920s, as Dante later explained it indeed was, lovingly restored. As they passed through wrought iron gates, Natalie gaped at the expanse of nature. Tall oaks and maples shedding russet leaves, manicured gardens blending into wild meadow, and the lake shimmering beyond with a boathouse at its shore. It was hard to imagine anything bad ever penetrating such a serene haven. Inside, the manor was luxurious, yet surprisingly warm in decor. Dante led her through an impressive foyer with a sweeping staircase to the second floor, where her new quarters awaited. "I thought you'd like this room," he said, pushing open double doors to a suite with a breathtaking view of the lake. The space was beautifully furnished. A canopy bed, a fireplace, and French doors opening to a balcony. Despite her inner turmoil, Natalie couldn't help but smile. "It's amazing," she turned to Dante. "Thank you." He seemed pleased that she liked it. "My room is just down the hall," he mentioned casually. "And your friend Hallie will be arriving tomorrow." Natalie's eyes widened in surprise and joy. "Hallie, really?" She had tearfully told Hallie a modified version of events the night before, that she was pregnant by a donor mix-up, and there had been some threats. So she was going to a safe location, looked after by the father who turned out to be a good man. Hallie had been shocked but supportive. Natalie had wanted to see her, but didn't think it possible. Dante nodded. "I thought having someone familiar around might help you feel more at home. We can trust her, right?" He raised an eyebrow slightly, since Hallie knowing anything was technically a security risk. Natalie nearly threw her arms around him. "Yes, absolutely. She would never betray my trust." "Oh, Dante, thank you." He smiled and brushed a kiss on her forehead. "I need to step out to coordinate with security," he said reluctantly. "Marco will be with you. I'll find you for lunch?" She nodded, watching him go with a pang. He'd done so much to make her comfortable, and now likely would plunge himself into deadly work. She vowed to do whatever she could on her end to make this ordeal end quickly too, even if that meant simply taking care of herself and not adding to his worries. True to his word, Dante was largely away from the house or holed up in his office over the next week. Hallie's arrival was a joyful distraction. When her friend burst into the foyer and pulled Natalie into a tight hug, both of them crying, it felt like a piece of her old life had been returned. Of course, Hallie was wide-eyed at the palatial estate and the army of staff and guards. "Girl, what have you landed in?" she whispered in amazement as they toured the gardens. Natalie could only laugh helplessly and say, "It's a long story." In private, she confessed more of the truth. who Dante really was, what danger lurked. Hallie took it remarkably well. It's like one of those wild novels you read, Nat, and promised to stay as long as needed. Having Hallie there provided a sense of normalcy. They baked cookies in the gourmet kitchen, under the amused gaze of the head chef, took walks by the lake with 2 security shadows in tow, and Hallie even got Natalie to play some piano again in the Manor's old study room. Hallie also witnessed firsthand the tender dynamic between Natalie and Dante. One evening, when Dante returned earlier than expected, he found the women laughing in the den over an old movie. He paused to greet Hallie politely. She later admitted to Natalie she nearly swooned at his movie star looks and old-world manners. Then he fixed his attention on Natalie, tucking a lock of hair behind her ear as he often did, and asking softly if she'd eaten dinner and how she was feeling. Hallie observed the whole exchange with a knowing smirk. Later that night, as they prepared for bed like teenagers at a sleepover, Hallie nudged Natalie. "Spill, hun. You two are completely smitten, aren't you?" Natalie felt heat creep to her cheeks. "Is it that obvious?" she murmured, fiddling with her hairbrush. Hallie rolled her eyes playfully. "Only to someone with eyeballs. The way he looks at you, girl, it's intense. And you light up when he's around, even when you're exhausted." Natalie couldn't hide her smile. "I really have fallen for him, Hallie. It's crazy and unexpected. But I love him." Saying it aloud to her friend felt like releasing a secret butterfly into the air. "And he said he loves me too." Hallie clasped her hands in delight. "That's the best thing I've heard all year. I mean, it's insane given how it started, but honestly, sometimes the wildest stories make the best ones." She grew more serious then. "Do you see a future with him, like really with him? Because his world, it's not easy." Natalie looked out the window at the moonlit lake. "I do," she answered quietly. "I know there are dangers and challenges. But Dante's shown me parts of himself no one else sees, I think. He's protective, yes, but also gentle and good to me. And he's going to be a wonderful father." She smiled softly, thinking of how he'd taken to reading parenting books at night, something she caught him doing when she peeked in his office one time, much to his sheepish embarrassment. Hallie squeezed her hand. "Then I'm thrilled for you. It's not the life we once imagined, but if you're happy, I'm with you all the way." The only dark cloud in those days was the looming confrontation with Petrov. Dante kept most details from her, not wanting to worry her, but she gleaned bits from hushed conversations and the grave faces of Marco and others. Petrov had gone underground and was proving elusive, and in the meantime, threats continued in the city. A skirmish here, a bomb scare there. Dante was stretched thin, managing an evolving gang war while trying to ensure the estate remained off the radar. One night, a storm lashed the lake with wind and rain. Natalie awoke past midnight to find the space beside her in bed empty. Not that Dante slept there. They hadn't shared a bed yet, as he was being old-fashioned and taking it slow to Hallie's endless teasing. But she somehow expected him to be there on such a wild night. Troubled by a sense of foreboding, she slipped out of her room and padded down the hall. A sliver of light shone under Dante's office door. Quietly, she peeked in. Dante stood by the window, phone to his ear, face illuminated intermittently by lightning. "No, keep her out of this. Do whatever it takes, but I will not have her involved," he was saying fiercely. Natalie's heart skipped. Was he talking about her? She listened guiltily. "I don't care if it draws him out faster. I said no," Dante snapped, then let out an exasperated breath. "Because I won't risk her life as bait. That's why. There's no negotiation on this." Natalie felt a chill. Someone must have suggested using her to lure Petrov. She shouldn't be surprised. She was the prize in the enemy's eyes. But Dante's protective refusal both relieved and alarmed her, because it meant finding Petrov was harder without that leverage. He went silent as the person on the line argued back. Finally, Dante practically growled. Find another way. You have 48 hours. He ended the call, tossing the phone on his desk with a curse. In that moment, a crack of thunder boomed, and the lights flickered. Dante glanced up and saw Natalie hovering at the door. His expression softened immediately. Nat, you should be asleep, he said, concern lacing his tone as he came toward her. Is everything all right? She stepped in, wrapping her arms around herself, and nodded. I woke up and... She searched his tired face. And I missed you. It was partly true. She also didn't want him stewing alone. Without a word, Dante opened his arms and Natalie went into them gladly. He held her close, resting his chin atop her head. She felt some of the tension leave his body as they stood together listening to the rain lash the windows. Are you all right? She whispered. He sighed. Better now. Pulling back slightly, he traced a finger along her cheek. I'm sorry if I woke you. Things have been complicated. She wanted to say he didn't have to apologize, but instead she mustered her courage. Let me in, Dante. Please. Don't carry it all yourself. His eyes searched hers, conflict evident. I just want you to be safe and not worry more than you already do. I worry more when I'm left in the dark, she countered gently. I know I can't fight your battles, but I can at least carry some of the fear with you. Dante closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. He led her to the leather couch and they sat, still holding each other. Quietly, as the storm raged outside, he told her what weighed on him. Petrov's forcing my hand. We have intel he might try something drastic soon. My allies think if we dangle what he wants, we could draw him out into a trap. His jaw clenched. They want to use you as that bait, leak word of your location, set a false security lapse, then snare him. Natalie inhaled sharply. That's incredibly risky. I refused, Dante said immediately, voice low and fierce. I will not put you in harm's way like that. Not when we can find another way. I couldn't live with myself if something happened to you. Emotion tightened her throat. But if he's never drawn out, does that mean you'll always be fighting from the shadows? Always looking over our shoulders? Dante's silence was answer enough. That future was unacceptable. They both knew it. Natalie realized with a mix of fear and resolve that perhaps she had to do something after all. She took Dante's hand, lacing their fingers. Hypothetically, if you did go with their plan, do you think it would work? Would Petrov come? Dante looked at her sharply. We're not entertaining that, Natalie. She squeezed his hand. I'm just asking. Would he take the bait? Dante hesitated, then relented, because he could see she'd think on it regardless. Likely, yes. That man is obsessed with not leaving loose ends or being bested. If he thought he had a shot at grabbing you, he'd make a move. His eyes flashed anger at the mere idea. But it's too dangerous. Even if we had a controlled setup, too much can go wrong. I nearly lost you once. I won't risk it again. Natalie's free hand rested on her belly. A maternal protectiveness warred with her desire to end this threat once and for all. Could she risk herself and by extension the baby? But she'd have Dante's forces protecting them during the trap, presumably. And if it succeeded, the baby's future would be secure. What if we made it safer? She found herself saying slowly. Like, double layers of protection, backup plans. I wouldn't be alone. I'd be guarded but visibly present to lure him. Dante was already shaking his head. Natalie, no. I understand your bravery. But no. She turned toward him, taking his face in her hands so he had to see her determination. I don't want to live in fear, Dante. I don't want our child to live in a fortress forever. If drawing Petrov out means this ends, maybe it's worth the risk. Her voice trembled on the last part, because God, the risk terrified her. but she remembered her own thought weeks ago. I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe, little one. This was an extension of that promise, facing danger now to ensure a safer tomorrow. Dante grasped her wrists gently, removing her hands from his face to kiss her palms one by one. You are the bravest woman I've ever met, he murmured, eyes glistening with emotion. And the most precious thing in the world to me. That's why I can't agree to this. I know you want to help end it. But if something went wrong... His voice broke slightly. I couldn't live. Neither could our baby, likely. It's not just about you. It's about them too. He placed a hand reverently on her abdomen. Natalie's resolve wavered at that. He was right. It wasn't just her life. It was their child's too. She felt tears slip down her cheeks, frustrated and scared and touched by how deeply he cared. She leaned into him, and he enveloped her in a protective embrace. We'll find another way, he whispered into her hair. I swear it. They stayed like that for a long time, comforted by each other's presence. Eventually he coaxed her back to bed, even though he himself wouldn't sleep. Just rest, my love, he urged as he tucked her in back in her room, Hallie softly snoring in the adjacent suite, oblivious to the drama. I'll be here when you wake. He kissed her forehead as she closed her eyes. Natalie did fall asleep again, exhausted by the emotional storm. In the morning, Dante was indeed there, but only briefly. Just long enough to assure her that plans were afoot and she shouldn't worry. Try to have a peaceful day with Hallie, he said over breakfast, brushing a kiss to her knuckles. You'll be safe here. I have to step out for a meeting, but Marco and 10 others will be on the grounds. She hated how formal he sounded, like he was already mentally in battle, but she mustered a smile and squeezed his hand. Be careful, she reminded, her brown eyes conveying everything she felt. Come back to me. He nodded, understanding. Always. That afternoon crawled by. Hallie could sense something was off and tried to lighten the mood with a silly board game and making ice cream sundaes in the kitchen. Natalie appreciated it but remained preoccupied, glancing at the clock, waiting for Dante to return. He didn't. Instead, near dusk, Marco found Natalie and Hallie sitting in the parlor and informed them Mr. Giordano was delayed and had recommended they have dinner without him. Natalie's heart sank. Delayed could mean many things. She attempted to eat the meal the staff prepared, but her appetite had fled. With Hallie's encouragement, she went upstairs to rest, feeling an unnameable dread creeping in as night fell, and still no word from Dante. Close to midnight, a sudden commotion downstairs jolted her from a half-sleep. Raised voices, the sound of doors slamming. Natalie threw on a robe and hurried out just as Hallie emerged from her room, looking frightened. Stay here, Marco's voice commanded at the base of the stairs. Natalie rushed to the railing. Marco, what's happened? She called, anxiety sharpening her tone. The man looked up, his normally stoic face betraying strain. There's been an incident, Ms. Thompson, he said carefully. Dante, Mr. Giordano, was injured. He's being brought here. The world tilted. Natalie gripped the railing. Injured? How bad? Her voice was barely audible. Before he could answer, the front door burst open and a group of men entered carrying a stretcher. On it lay Dante, pale and unconscious, a blood-stained bandage wrapped around his side. Natalie's breath left her in a sob. She flew down the stairs, Hallie on her heels. Dante! She dropped to her knees beside the stretcher as they placed it down in the foyer. One of Dante's men was pressing a cloth to Dante's side. It was soaked crimson. Dante's face was ashen, but to her relief, he moaned softly. Alive. Barely. A stern-looking older man with a medical bag pushed through. Dr. Galletti, Dante's personal physician. Clear the way, let's get him to the study, he barked. The study was on the ground floor, nearest and outfitted with first aid supplies Natalie knew. She followed closely as they lifted Dante onto a sofa in the study, ignoring anyone who tried to pull her back. Dr. Galletti immediately set to work, barking for IV fluids and more light. Natalie knelt at Dante's head, gently brushing his sweat-damped hair back. I'm here, Dante, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Please hang on. His eyes flickered open at her voice, glazed with pain. Natalie, he rasped. One blood-stained hand weakly found hers. You're safe, good. She choked back a sob. Don't you dare worry about me right now. she said, trying to smile through tears. You'll be okay. You hear me? You have to be. Because I love you and I need you. Her voice broke on a hiccuped cry. He gave a faint ghost of a smile and squeezed her hand, which terrified her because it felt so feeble. Love, you, he managed before drifting off again with a grimace as the doctor began cleaning the wound. Natalie felt Hallie's comforting presence behind her, a hand rubbing her back. He'll be okay, Nat. He's in good hands, Hallie said, though her voice trembled. Marco quietly explained what had happened. An ambush at a supposed meeting location, a trap by Petrov. There was a firefight, and Dante took a bullet to the side, but his men got him out, and Petrov, he escaped yet again. The despair of that news nearly crushed Natalie. This all for nothing, and Dante gravely hurt. For the next hour, Natalie refused to leave the study, watching with held breath as Dr. Galletti and a medic performed minor surgery to extract the bullet and suture the wound. They gave Dante blood transfusions and monitored his vitals. Finally, nearing dawn, the doctor looked up and gave a tired nod. He'll live. Miss Thompson, he'll be fine with rest. The bullet missed major organs, fortunately. Natalie broke into relieved tears, covering her face briefly. When she regained composure, she found the doctor smiling kindly. He kept mumbling your name whenever he was semi-conscious. You seem to have an effect on him. Good. Use that to keep him calm when he wakes. As they carefully moved Dante to a proper bed, a guest room on the ground floor to avoid stairs for now, Natalie was allowed to stay by his side. Hallie squeezed her shoulder and withdrew to give them privacy after confirming Natalie was okay. Natalie sat vigil at Dante's bedside, holding his hand through the morning as his anesthesia wore off. Exhaustion weighed on her, but she didn't close her eyes until she saw his flutter open around noon. He looked disoriented until he saw her. Natalie, he croaked, trying to sit up with a wince. She immediately pressed him gently back down. Shh, I'm here. You need to lie still. She managed a shaky smile. You scared me half to death, you know. He exhaled, some tension leaving him at her presence. Sorry, he whispered. His free hand drifted to her abdomen, checking. You baby? All right? She laughed softly through tears. We're fine. We were safe like you wanted. She brought his hand to her lips and kissed it. Now focus on getting better, please. Dante's eyes welled unexpectedly. I thought I wouldn't see you again, he confessed haltingly. All I could think of was you. Natalie leaned over and kissed him tenderly, brushing his hair back. You're stuck with me, Dante Giordano. I'm not going anywhere. The days that followed were a slow recovery for Dante. He chafed at being bedridden, but Natalie rather enjoyed fussing over him for once, making sure he ate the bland soups the doctor ordered, reading aloud newspaper snippets to keep him entertained, and carefully omitting any alarming news. Hallie proved an invaluable source of levity, quipping that a bullet wound was one way to get a vacation. Dante even chuckled at that, which made Natalie's heart soar, hearing that sound again. While Dante healed, his men continued the hunt for Petrov. Natalie overheard that the failed ambush had at least narrowed Petrov's hiding spot. It seemed the climax was nearing. She felt a strange calm. The worst had happened, nearly losing Dante. And somehow they got through it. On a crisp morning 2 weeks later, Natalie was helping Dante slowly walk a few steps in the garden, doctor-approved light exercise, when Marco came briskly toward them, face triumphant. We got him, he announced simply. Petrov is finished. Dante halted, gripping Natalie's arm for support as much from the news as the exertion. Dead? He asked. Marco nodded. Cornered last night in Chicago. It's confirmed. For a long moment, Dante closed his eyes, breathing out years of tension. Natalie saw a visible weight lift off him. It was over. The nightmare that bound them was finally over. She let out a little sob of joy and threw her arms carefully around Dante. We're free, she whispered. Dante held her close, burying his face in her hair. Free, he repeated, amazement and relief coloring the word. Marco discreetly left, leaving the two to absorb the moment. Dante pulled back just enough to cup Natalie's face, his eyes shining. Now we can truly start anew, he said softly. She nodded, tears rolling. He kissed them away one by one. then captured her lips in a loving kiss under the bright autumn sky. In the weeks that followed Petrov's demise, life took on a golden hue of hope for Natalie and Dante. They returned to Manhattan only to finalize a few things, including Natalie's resignation from her job, with a generous thank you bonus courtesy of Dante, and the sale of her old apartment. There was nothing there for her now. Her life was firmly entwined with Dante's. They decided to make the estate their primary home, at least for the foreseeable future. Natalie found she loved the tranquility and beauty of it, and Dante was more at ease knowing layers of security were naturally in place for his family. Hallie stayed long enough to be introduced to one of Dante's charming cousins, and sparks flew. Natalie had a feeling her friend would be visiting often. Late November arrived, and with it, the first dusting of snow on the pines around the lake. Dante had recovered well enough to resume light work, to his relief, and he and Natalie fell into a gentle routine of preparing for their baby's arrival. They turned one of the manor's sunny rooms into a nursery, painting the walls a pale yellow and filling it with the furniture Dante's enthusiastic sisters sent as gifts. One evening, after a quiet dinner by the fireplace, Dante led Natalie by the hand to the library. "I have something for you," he said mysteriously. She laughed as he made her cover her eyes while he positioned her. "Okay, open." She gasped. Before her, the once empty corner of the library now housed a small bookshop-like nook. Shelves lined with new copies of her favorite novels, a cozy armchair beside an authentic vintage bookstore sign that read, "Natalie's Nook." "Dante, did you build this for me?" she asked, voice watery with emotion. He shrugged with a playful smile. "I know how much you loved your bookstore visits. I thought, why not have one here at home?" His tone turned earnest. "You gave up a lot to join my world. I wanted to give a piece of yours back to you." Natalie threw her arms around him, joyful tears spilling. "It's perfect. You are unbelievable." She pulled back to look at him with all the love she felt. "Thank you." He brushed a kiss to her nose. "Only the best for you. Always." They settled into the armchair together, or rather Dante settled, and then pulled her onto his lap, despite her protests about her protruding belly. He cradled her and the baby bump with care. "Comfortable?" he murmured against her ear. She nodded, sighing contentedly. "I have everything I need right here." He nuzzled her neck. "As do I." Their wedding, when it happened just before Christmas, was a small, intimate affair at the estate, attended by family and a few close friends. Hallie, of course, as maid of honor. Natalie walked down an aisle improvised in the snow-dusted garden, wearing an ivory gown that flowed around her 7-month belly, towards Dante, who waited under a canopy of twinkling lights. He looked devastatingly handsome and profoundly moved. She had never seen his eyes shine with such tears. When they exchanged vows, Dante's voice wavered as he promised to love and protect her for all his days, and Natalie vowed to stand by him through any storm, to be his light, as he had been hers. As they sealed their marriage with a tender, lingering kiss, applause and cheers rang through the crisp winter air. Natalie felt the baby give a little kick, as if in approval, and she laughed against Dante's lips, whispering the news to him. His face lit up in wonder. It was an auspicious blessing indeed. That night, cuddled together by the fireplace with cocoa in hand, they reflected on the whirlwind that had brought them there. Who would have thought a routine checkup would lead to this? Natalie mused, leaning her head on her husband's shoulder. The firelight danced in her eyes. Dante chuckled. Fate works mysteriously. What began as a mistake turned into the greatest fortune of my life. He kissed the top of her head. You and our child. You're everything to me. Natalie smiled up at him, heart full. And you are everything to us. She guided his hand to her belly, where a tiny flutter indicated their daughter was active. They had learned it was a girl, to Dante's utter delight. He already had visions of a dark-haired little princess to spoil. As the first snowflakes of Christmas began to drift outside, Dante pulled Natalie closer on the sofa, wrapping an arm securely around her and resting a hand on her stomach to feel their baby's gentle movements. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow and the crackling fire, each lost in gratitude. Natalie's mind drifted to the journey behind and the future ahead. So much had happened: heartbreak, fear, danger, but it all led to this moment of peace and profound happiness. She thought of that scared, confused woman she'd been months ago and wished she could tell her then, "Hold on, because something beautiful is on the other side of all this." Dante's voice rumbled softly, interrupting her reverie. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Giordano?" The title still gave her butterflies. She tilted her face up to his. "I was just thinking how I wouldn't change a thing. Every twist and turn brought me here. With you." His gaze warmed, and he lowered his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. "I feel the same," he murmured. "You changed my life, Natalie. Gave it meaning I never knew I lacked." They shared a smile, that special smile of two souls who had walked through fire and come out the other side stronger and together. As the evening wore on, Dante fetched a well-worn book of poetry from the shelf, one he'd often read to her on cozy nights. In his deep, soothing voice, he began to recite a verse about love conquering all obstacles. Natalie closed her eyes, snuggling into his embrace, letting his words wash over her like a soothing melody. The baby gave another content kick, as if soothed too by her father's voice. Natalie realized she had never felt so completely content. The shadows of the past had finally been chased away, leaving only the glow of a bright future. She and Dante had found an extraordinary love in the most unlikely way, and now nothing would ever break the family they had forged through courage, loyalty, and love. Outside, the snow fell softly, blanketing the world in purity and quiet. Inside, Natalie felt warmth radiate from the man beside her and the tiny life within her. Her eyes drifted to the window, where beyond the glass the estate grounds stretched safe and serene. It struck her that not long ago she had stood in a similar window in Dante's penthouse, wondering if this place could ever be home. Now it was clear. Home was not the manor or the city. Home was Dante. Home was the arms that held her, and the laughter they shared and the baby they awaited. Tears of happiness pricked her eyes as she looked at Dante's beloved face, calm in the firelight as he read softly. Unable to resist, she leaned up and placed a tender kiss on his jaw mid-sentence. He paused, smiling down at her quizzically. "What was that for?" he asked, brushing a thumb across her cheek. Natalie beamed, wiping away an errant tear. "For everything. For loving me. For this new life." She rested her hand over his heart. "I'm just so grateful, Dante." His eyes shone as he set the book aside and cradled her face between his palms. "No, my love. Thank you. You brought light and hope into my world. You made me a better man." He swallowed, emotion thickening his voice. "And you've given me the family I never dared dream of." Their lips met in a slow, sweet kiss that spoke of all the gratitude, love, and promise their words couldn't capture. When they parted, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "Merry Christmas, cara mia," he whispered, "and to many, many more." Natalie smiled radiantly, hearing the subtle double meaning. Many more Christmases, many more blessings, many more years side by side. "Merry Christmas, Dante," she replied softly. "Here's to our forever." And as they sat together, under the gentle glow of the lights, listening to the peaceful hush of the snow beyond, Natalie knew in her heart that their story, once born of a mistake and forged through trials, had become a tale of enduring love and newfound hope. It was an ending, yes, but also a beautiful beginning. One they would write together, hand in hand, for the rest of their days.